Well, to catch all of you up on what's been happening to those who haven't been listening, first of all, go back and listen to them, these previous episodes, but if you really can't be asked, well, me, Tom, and my kids were sitting on a bench waiting for my brother to arrive to pick us up. We didn't wait there too long before a car pulled up. It was a frost white colour with rounded headlights. The man who stood out of it was about 3 to 4 inches shorter than I was wearing a black suit with a white shirt with a swan pattern on it, with the top 2 buttons undone. He had thick blonde hair with a beard to match. As he exited his car, he pulled out a large black umbrella to shelter him from the rain. As he approached, he finally greeted us. He greeted us and introduced himself as Ted. I then looked up at him, bringing my face into the light. He stared at me for a few seconds, as I finally then said, "Long time no see, eh, brother?" He then apologised for the staring. He'd obviously heard about and seen the results of me mixing my DNA with Scarvera's, but this was the first time he was seeing it in person. He then turned to James and shook hands with him, introducing himself as Uncle Ted. Great, never gonna hear the end of that one. He then spotted Sarah, whom I was still holding, wrapped in a blanket to keep her warm and out of the rain. Ted's eyes opened widely, and then asked me why I never mentioned her. I replied with, "She's a new addition that not many people know about, and quite frankly for her sake I'd like to keep it that way if it's all the same." Ted nodded with agreement. He then asked if he could pick her up and hold her. Although he was my brother, and he did seem to be kind, gentle and charming, I was still a little resilient to letting him hold her. You gotta remember, I ain't seen her in years. But regardless, I let him hold her. Tom held his umbrella while he did. He brought her right up to his face, staring into her green eyes, and just smiled at her. He remained like this for about 30 seconds, until she began to cry. He then immediately gave her back to me, and I began doing the whole, "Shh, there, it's alright, no one's gonna hurt you, it's not. Unfortunately, when babies start crying, it's increasingly difficult to try and stop them. I gave my brother a look of good going, genius. Ted then retook his umbrella from Tom and showed us to his car. He opened the passenger door for me to sit there, though I declined, deciding to sit in the back, putting Sarah back into the papoose. I reckoned it was what you're supposed to do. After all, babies' car seats have to go in the back, so... But this made James happy because he was then able to sit in the front. I don't know what it is about sitting in the front of a car, especially when you're a kid sitting in that front passenger seat. I remember me and Ted used to fight about it even when we were little. And I used to always fucking win because I was the older brother. Hey, don't blame me. That's just how things were. Tom then got in the other back seat next to me. Ted then finally got in the car, started the engine, and we were off. What endeavours, I wonder, was Ted going to be taking us to? A nice, quiet, peaceful little house, away from everything. The perfect place to drop off the grid and hide away until the heat died down? Or would it be something even worse? Either way, we could hardly turn back now, so whatever lay ahead of us, we were in for the ride. The road, if you could call it that, was very bumpy, as I continuously was shaken about in the back seat of the car, desperately trying to keep Sarah as steady as I possibly could. James, however, seemed to be enjoying it. I guess he decided that it was some sort of ride or added feature. And as for Tom, he didn't really seem to be bothered by it. I'd finally been sitting there long enough, and I finally decided to ask the question I'd been, waiting to ask for quite a while. I said to him, okay, Ted, not that I'm not grateful, Max, but why get into contact with me now? Why get back in touch now after all these years? I then saw his eyes glance at mine in the rearview mirror. His eyes then went back to fixing on the road, as they should do. He said he'd been meaning to, but always managed to convince himself to pass on it. But once he found out that he was now an uncle, that had apparently finally caused him to bite the bullet and get into contact with me. Still though, even then it took him about a year at least to even do that. After all, James's presence, at least to the public, was made fairly quickly. There was obviously the few people on Mars who would have quickly made the connection. But in terms of mass media, well, it wasn't exactly very long after my recovery. After stabbing myself, that, it was made public. Admittedly, I had no idea how long that news had, taken to get to him, but even so, that was a long time. And I did confront him on this. This made him slow down the car to a complete halt, so he could turn to face me. He then took a breath and told me that I wasn't exactly remembered very favourably by him. And when I made the argument that I was a better family to him than our parents were, he seemed to take an offence to that. Unlike myself, he seemed to remember our parents very favourably. I guess he just wasn't around when they betrayed me. After telling him that, he took a second, and the next words that came out of his mouth were, "Oh, you're just over-exaggerating," which made little sense. To be honest, to me it was less about the amount that they were stealing and more the fact that they were stealing money from me in the first place. He then asked me if I knew if they were alive or not. I told him if all I cared... Look, I'm not proud of what I said. I'll spare you the details, but you just gotta understand things were not good between me and them. Tom then asked me if I had truly changed, as apparently to him I was doing the thing where I insisted I was better than everyone else. True, I did do that back in the day, though. Not now. Ted then turned back around and clasped the steering wheel. He then took a deep breath and told us maybe we should just have a fresh start. I then sat back in my seat, looking out of the window, and I agreed. I could tell the awkwardness felt between Tom and James, just having to sit there and witness this. I knew for a fact that I had changed, but I still didn't know whether he had or not. He was, I guess, the more responsible one, and it did seem that he was still showing signs of that. He was also the least interesting. I mean, you'd hire him if you want, the job doing as quickly and efficiently as possible. But you'd hire me if you'd actually want to have fun while doing it. But anyway, we kept on driving, this time in an awkward silence, before Ted decided to finally break it. He didn't decide to talk to me. Instead, he decided to talk to James, asking him really basic stuff, like how things were going with his life, what does he want to be when he grows up, yada yada. But then suddenly, Ted slammed on the brakes. As I was jerked forward, I was only just in the nick of time to pull Sarah back from banging her head from the seat in front of her. She then began crying again, which was great. I asked, demanded, had Ted tell me what the fuck is going on. He turned to me in shock and horror and said that there was a corpse lying in the middle of the road. Unfortunately, due to how narrow this road was, there was no way of driving over it, as there was a barrier on either side, and the corpse appeared to be lying on its side. I unstrapped the papoose and gave Sarah to James, Ted looking a bit disappointed that I didn't give her to him. I then got out of the car, and I was joined by Tom. We then went to investigate the body, and we could confirm straight away that it was dead. The back of its head had been ripped off, exposing the brains within that were just oozing out of the skull. Tom then asked me if I was going to do the blood test that I had done on the train previously. I agreed, but only if he looked away. I made it look like I was just crouching down and examining the body, so that James and more importantly Ted couldn't see what I was doing. The blood was cold and stale. I told Tom I reckoned that this corpse had been here at least a couple of hours, perhaps longer. Although the blood did seem pretty stale, it wasn't stale enough that I couldn't taste anything at all, which is generally how blood tasted to me. That was not as fresh, shall we say. We then heard some groaning noises. They were coming from the bushes next to the road. We both slowly backed up towards the car. However, before we were able to open the doors, the thing that was making the rustling noises emerged. I couldn't believe it. It looked to be a zombie. Although it wasn't eating the brain, at that point it clearly had at some point, as I could make out bits of it round its mouth, and all over its tattered clothes that it was wearing. Its skin was a charcoal grey, and its eyes were pale white, dead. We quickly opened the doors and got back in the car. Ted then immediately locked them. Ted then slammed down the pedal, and the car accelerated. We could feel it when we ran over the corpse, mangling it to pieces. Myself and Tom looked out of the back window. We still saw the zombie figure, staring at us, with its pale white eyes in the distance. Eyes that never seemed to blink. There were so many questions going through my head, like, what, why, how? An actual zombie. And then an even worse and even nastier thought came into my head. Was if there was more than just one of them. When I said Ted had put the pedal to the metal, I meant that quite literally, as he began to lose control of his car, as we began swerving from left to right on a wet, slippery road. And unfortunately, one of these turns was sharp enough to crash through the barrier at the side of the road. The car then hurled into some bushes by the side of it. Luckily, crashing into the bushes wasn't as bad as if we would have, crashed into a tree. As trees are a lot stronger and more rigid, they tend not to move, so that could have been fatal. Luckily, the bushes, however, were more like a soft airbag. Crashing the car, yes, but giving it minimal damage. It didn't even leave a scratch on the windshield. Ted banged his head against the steering wheel, and what would later leave a nasty bruise. Myself and Tom were fine in the back. Our seat belts had stopped us from hitting the seats in front of us. However, I then suddenly realised Sarah was in the front. I quickly undid my belt, opened the door, and then opened the passenger door. There I found that James had twisted himself to the side in order that he would feel the full impact of the crash and not Sarah. She was screaming, though looked to be completely unharmed. As for James, he'd managed to bang his head on the door frame so hard that it had cut open his skin, and he was bleeding. I asked Ted if he had a medical kit. He said no, but he did say he did have a blanket in the back. I went and popped the boot open, grabbed the blanket, and placed it against James' forehead, where the blood was leaking out from. Even though James was in pain, as he constantly kept telling me, he was also absolutely livid at Ted for causing the crash. I had to stop him from moving around so much and remain still, as it was preventing me from trying to stop the blood flow coming out of the wound on his head. Tom reached over from the back seat and picked up Sarah so James could finally relax his muscles. I told James to hold the blanket up to his forehead. It was the best we could do for now, and although it was a really nasty cut, it didn't seem very deep. I was more concerned whether James would have a concussion from this or not. I told Ted to get out of the driver's seat and into the back. I was driving from here on out, Ted being incredibly apologetic as he exited the car and made his way over to the back seat. I then got in the driver's seat and tried the engine. Luckily, everything seemed to be working. I reversed slowly back onto the road However, as we jerked, I realised something. I got out to check just to make sure. Unfortunately, one of the tyres had been punctured during the crash. It hadn't gone completely flat, but the air was leaking out of it. I quickly asked Ted how far away was his house. He said about 3 miles. True, we could walk it, but with a zombie coming at us from the rear, and James needing medical attention, our best bet was to use the car for as long as we could. I got back in and started driving. It was only a matter of time before we'd lose all the air in that tyre. So that I could keep control and stop the car from crashing again, I made sure not to go above 30 miles an hour. Yes, it was pretty slow, but it was a hell of a lot faster than walking. It would also mean that hopefully we would reach Ted's place in a matter of minutes. Things, admittedly, were not off to a great start between the two of us. We'd had an argument about our parents, encountered a corpse, and then a zombie of all things, and now Ted had crashed the car, not only endangering our lives, but injuring James in the process. To say that he wasn't in my good books at the minute was a sheer understatement. Though at the time I didn't feel as angry as I did later on. Maybe it's because at the time I didn't want our reunited relationship to be completely, destroyed again because of these events. Or maybe I was just focused on getting to his house and getting to safety. Either way, suffice to say, it did all come out later on. But now looking at it in retrospective, I think he was the one most angry about what he'd done. And he was definitely apologetic and blaming himself the whole time. And to be honest, nothing could have prepared him for what he saw. I mean, he saw an actual real-life zombie, for crying out loud. Of course he was going to be scared. I mean, I was shocked myself. Though with everything I've been through and the things I've seen, I guess I'm just better at dealing with stuff like that. But Ted, he's not used to this kind of life. And here I am, bringing it all upon him. There was a lot more swerving and bumping around a bit. It was becoming near impossible to go in a straight line. However, it gave Tom the opportunity to actually contact USP about what had happened. There was only a few members of USP who actually knew of my location, just in case there was some sort of emergency. The rest of them hadn't the foggiest where I'd gone, and quite frankly, I'd like it to still stay that way. After all, I don't want that information leaking out. But anyway, we made it to Ted's house. Unlike mine, which was in a neighbourhood of sorts, his was pretty much in the middle of nowhere. It was more like a little cottage, actually. It looked to be made of old-fashioned bricks. And to be honest, it was hard to really make it out from the road, as the trees in the surrounding area seemed to give it pretty good camouflage. When we entered, the inside was like a log cabin. Ted had left the fire still burning, which I can imagine is some sort of safety hazard. But anyway, as soon as we got there, I sat James down on the settee. Now that I could actually see the wound in some decent lighting, I could tell that it wasn't as bad as I initially thought. Being a member of USP, I was trained in first aid, and James seemed to be showing all signs of being perfectly fine. The most he'd probably get out of this is possibly a small scar on his head. However, his fur would cover that up no problem. As it was late, I asked Ted if he could show James his room so he could go to bed. As he had no idea of Sarah coming, he had no cot, though he did happen to have a large empty storage box. He got a spare quilt and some cushions, and a pillow and placed them in, stuffing them in as well. I then gave Tom the go-ahead to place Sarah in this storage box. There wasn't a massive amount of room. It was about 2 foot long by 1.5 foot wide. Not perfect, but not bad. At least it showed that Ted was able to think on his feet. I then took a quick glance around the place and asked him a question that I hadn't thought of asking until now. That question was simply, did he live alone? He looked slightly confused and puzzled for a second, took a quick glance around the room himself, and replied with a puzzling sounding yes. I asked him if he had a girlfriend, boyfriend, or any sort of relationship. Again, he kind of looked a bit blank, lifted both of his shoulders to almost shrug, and widened his mouth to say no. I could tell that either he was puzzled by what I was asking, or perhaps it was distressing or upsetting for him. So I decided to immediately change the subject, and then asked him a more general thing like how long he lived in this house. He said around 8 months. He told me he was one of the lucky people who was actually evacuated, though apparently he needn't have bothered as Britain was not affected. Well, at least not in terms of being blown up anyway, but otherwise was deeply affected by it. I then asked him if he had a spare tyre for the car. He said he had maybe one or two in the shed out back. I asked him to get it for me, along with a jack. The puzzled look then became one of astonishment when he asked me why on earth I would want to do it now. I told him that I was going to go back to where we encountered the zombie, and I was going to find out where it came from. Ted obviously thought I was absolutely crazy for thinking such a thing. Tom, knowing me better, suggested that I could at least wait until morning or when USP were able to investigate, and then maybe assist them along with it. However, I replied to this by saying that I wanted to get hot on the trail now, while it was still warm. By morning, most of the traces of that zombie have probably dissipated. Remember, that corpse had been there some time when we got there. After seeing that, I attempted to make it to the door. However, Ted pushed past me and put his arms across the doorway, blocking it. Asked politely but also sarcastically at the same time for Ted to please move out of the way. He then said to me, "Are you crazy, stupid, ignorant, or just all of the above?" I told him that I didn't have time to play any stupid games, and that I needed to get on the trail now. Ted then grabbed me by the lapels of my coat. I pulled his hands off, saying, "Careful! James made this for me, after I ruined the first one that he made in Australia." He then said to me, "So you care about James, do you?" I replied with, "Have you got any other stupid questions?" Ted then raised his finger, pointing at me, and began monologuing. "So you care about your son, and your baby girl. You want to be safe, but you're willing to throw it all away, just to satisfy your own curiosity." I told him that I was doing it to keep them safe. That zombie was still very much still out there. Tom then finally joined the conversation, saying that although he knew I meant well, we would all be a lot safer staying in Ted's house. We could all take turns taking watch, but at the pace the zombie was going at, and the fact that it didn't even catch up to us when we crashed, it probably wouldn't arrive at the house until morning anyway, and by that time USP will have arrived, and we'll be able to properly deal with the situation. This jerked a slight nerve with me. I told Tom that I was sick of having to rely on USP all the time, that I wanted to be able to rely on myself, or at the very least not have to rely on them every 5 minutes. Tom shrugged and then made his way over, so that he was standing directly in front of me. He then looked me directly in the eye and said that this was the life I chose. I was the one who chose to work for USP in the first place. I was the one who decided to come here. He said that he'd learned to not try to stop me, as he knew that was now a foolish endeavour. But he did say if I did go that he would not be coming with me, nor would he come to rescue me if I needed help. If I decided to make this decision to leave, then it would just be me on my own. I said to him, "Fine." I then looked back over to the storage box, where Sarah was now just beginning to fall asleep. I then tried to make my way over to her, but then felt a pain as the Omicron virus began to take effect again. I began to lose my balance. I was falling. Tom, however, was quick on his feet and was able to catch me. He then brought me over to the settee and laid me down. He then proceeded to explain it all to Ted. After he'd finished, Ted turned to me, looking down at me lying on the settee. He said, "One more important thing you forgot to mention." I replied to him with, "To be fair, this one's a lot more recent than Sarah. Okay, not a lot more, but still." He then lifted me up slightly and put both of his arms around me and began crying on my shoulder. He started mumbling things like, "I'd only just got my brother back and now I'm gonna lose him again." Stuff like that. At least, that's what I thought he said. I don't know, he kind of the whole time, so it was hard for me to even hear what he was saying. However, I did do the thing that you're supposed to. I patted him on the back going, there, and seeing that everything's gonna be okay, and all the other stuff you're supposed to do. Whether it actually helps or works, dunno. I mean, it's the only case where lying is the right thing to do, where the lie gives people reassurance and, actually makes them feel better, because the lie had certainty to it, where the truth certainly did not. And with the way our brains and our minds work, we do like to be certain about things. We don't like not knowing things. So I guess maybe that's why we make up myths and tell lies, just to, explain things and fill in the gaps, so that we can pretend that we know, in where we know nothing. It seems that I may have disappointed some of you with the title of the podcast, I mean. Yes, I decided to call this one the Zombie Encounter, but although the zombie itself was lacking throughout this podcast and was only mentioned, the once, particularly in terms of an appearance, but let me just say, there's a word right next to the word zombie, and that is encounter. This podcast has all been about the encounter in which that we had with the zombie. I still intend to someday find out, where it came from, how all this was able to occur. Though unfortunately, that is going to have to wait for another day. USP did come in the morning and are currently investigating it. They said they would keep me up to date with any further developments. But otherwise, all traces of that zombie seem to have mysteriously vanished. As I predicted, the corpse by the morning was completely useless. Anything useful about it had either been rotted away over the night or washed away because of the rain. Look at the nights that I recovered on after having a little incident with the Omicron virus. I decided that I'd better go check on James. After all, I had no idea how this had affected him. Well, it turns out, despite what I thought, it hadn't really seemed to have affected him much at all, as I walked in on him as he was just about to have a wank. Yeah, actually, I probably shouldn't have mentioned that, and, yeah, except I better not leave this bit in. So yeah, anyway, James is fine. He's fine. He's totally fine. As for Ted, well, I think I've finally been able to judge his character after the past few days. He, is a bit of a recluse, and that he's not very sociable at all. It is difficult for him to hold interesting conversations. And he might be a bit of a coward, but I found that he does have a good heart. And he's a nice person. And I think now I finally trust him. I mean, not that I didn't trust my brother beforehand, but now that I've gotten, to know him again after having a massive gap, it just makes me wish that we got back in touch again sooner. Even if he does tend to stare at me and even James. in a bit of a weird way because of our appearance. Yeah, it's weird. He's the one person, really, that I come across now who just isn't used to my physical appearance. I kind of forget about it myself sometimes. The fact that I am a human scarver. Maybe I am too used to this type of life. Whether that's a problem or not is yet to be seen.